Good afternoon, and welcome to the second class, which is on the history of British visual art since 1945. And therefore chapter 10 altogether, I'm fairly sure. So what I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to go through some of the best known of British artists, sculptors and photographers over the last 60 or 70 years. And I imagine that you know a few of them and that you don't know much about most of them, which is good. And I'm going to try to look for each one a little bit, but it's always a difficult question, where they fit in this tension, rather than, it's not a strict division, but it's a tension between high culture, legitimate culture, and popular culture, defined in different ways. So the first person I want to talk about here is Henry Moore, born at the end of the 19th century, died in 1986, and best known for the sort of work that you see there, monumental bronze sculptures, which are located around the world as public works of art. He began with other kinds of work. He was the son of a mining engineer. He was born in Yorkshire, and his father was determined he wasn't going to work in the mines, and so worked him got him to do some education. But he decided very young to become a sculptor. He says he decided when he was 11 and discovered Michelangelo, and he was rather determined. And after the First World War, he received a grant to continue his education, and in 1919 became the first student of sculpture at the Leeds School of Art. And so originally he did some quite traditional work, but then he worked to commission. So as well as teaching alongside, this was one of his first public commission. Then this one that you can see before you, 1928, West Wind, which was one of the 8 winds reliefs on the walls of the London Underground headquarters in London there. So you see that's what he was doing there. That's not what he was most famous for, though. I mean, he's much more famous for this kind of thing. This is quite a small one. He does much bigger ones. And so you can see that they are, in this case, we have family. And he's done many versions of family. And so what could you say about this? Well, I think obviously there's an attempt to make the people anonymous. Yeah, these are not people you can recognize. They have very few facial features. And secondly, they tend to have, in my opinion, and they tend to have a real sort of presence, dignity, very much rooted to the ground. Look at the heavy plinth underneath them. And the other thing about family is that it has a reference to the history of art. If you paint or sculpt a man, a woman, and a small child, the reference is the Holy Family. The reference is the Holy Family, because that has been painted so many hundreds of times and sculpted so many hundreds and hundreds of times in the history of art. So that doesn't mean that Henry Moore is painting the Holy Family, is sculpting the Holy Family, but he's using that reference. So what does this do for the person looking at it? Well, it's up to you to decide whether you like it or you don't like it. Yeah, and you can put your own words to it. But certainly he gradually became very well known. This example of a couple is high up on the hills in Yorkshire, in the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. And this is important because in the case of public sculpture, which is very often Henry Moore's public sculpture, it's in the squares and in the streets, and in this case in the countryside, then the place it is put is always very important. Yeah, that the part of the work of art is deciding where to put it. And certainly the Yorkshire Sculpture Park is quite impressive, and you actually walk from sculpture to sculpture, and there are literally flocks of sheep around them. So very interesting there. And again, what is he showing about people? Obviously, if you take away their their facial features and you can't recognize them as a particular person, then they are bound to become somewhat archetypal to represent humanity in general. And so what is he saying here about domination, about fragility, and so on? Well, they're things which are not easy to put in words. In fact, one famous sculptor said, you sculpt things because you can't put them in words, but you can see the sort of things. They're pretty popular now. So this is clearly, from one point of view, high art. He's trained as a sculptor, although he came from a poor family. He was trained as a sculptor and became worked his way up in that and get public commissions, public money, and got more and more commissions as the years went by. Indeed, including a reclining figure for the UNESCO building in Paris. If the next time you're in Paris to look at that, his sometimes they are. Very often they are female figures. This reclining figure. Now, reclining figure again is a classic figure within the history of art. And so, what is he saying about women when he shows these different women reclining figures? Sometimes more abstract, sometimes less abstract. You can see there some of the more abstract ones. There's one of the less abstract ones. Well, I mean, again, it's difficult to put words with it, but certainly it seems that his female figures are not very sexualized, certainly not eroticized. And secondly, they do seem to have a tremendous power and dignity. This is in a garden. I can't remember. I'm not sure if this isn't in Cambridge. And you can see they really sit there. Now, is this the sort of thing that you want to walk past every day or have in a public park? Everybody, of course, has a different opinion, and obviously it's a different choice for public art than is the choice of heroes and so on. He will occasionally go for more abstract pieces, like this one, which is not even supposed to suggest a human figure. And occasionally be inspired from other cultures. And this one's clearly inspired by South American culture. During the Second World War, to go back in time a little bit, during the Second World War, he worked very much on the underground. I don't mean that he drove the underground. I mean that he was commissioned as a war artist and produced these powerful drawings of Londoners sleeping in the London Underground, sheltering from the bombs. Now, this was a long and an exciting story in a way. At the beginning of the war, the government did not refuse to allow people to go into the underground at night to hide, because they were frightened that people wouldn't come out and carry on working. And if people don't work, you can't win the war. But a popular campaign, including the Communist Party and trade unions, insisted on having this safety, and people would queue up for many hours to be able to get into the underground and sleep there. And Moore was commissioned to do these drawings. So this is, it's partly a almost patriotic service that is, this terrible time that people are suffering in. They want there to be drawings, or at least the government wants there to be drawings to commemorate it and to show it with some sort of mix of fragility and dignity. There's another one of his Second World War drawings. He would not generally produce political work. That was not his aim, although he himself was rather political. I mean, certainly he if I remember correctly, he refused to receive a, that's right, yeah, he refused to be knighted by the Queen in 1951. The Queen said, well, not the Queen, well, the government said, yeah, you should become Sir Henry Moore, and he refused this because he was too radical for that anyway. And he said he didn't want to be perceived as an establishment figure. And he said, and I quote, such a title might tend to cut me off from fellow artists whose work has aims similar to mine. So he did have some political ideas, but he didn't normally produce political work. This made the exception because 25 years exactly after the team of physicists led by Enrico Fermi achieved the first controlled self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction, he was commissioned to produce a sculpture to commemorate that discovery of nuclear energy. And at this time, this is I haven't got the exact date here, but it'd be in the 60s, I would think. when nuclear energy, of course, was controversial. Probably nuclear weapons were obviously generally thought of as a bad thing, but nuclear energy probably had more popularity at that time than it does today. In any case, this is what he produced to commemorate the invention of nuclear energy. So what is it? Well, obviously it's abstract, but it has certainly been suggested that it might represent a mushroom cloud, as a mushroom cloud produced by a nuclear explosion, and so something very threatening, or it might look like a human skull. And in any case, it's supposed to, I think, commemorate both the grandeur and the threats of nuclear energy. So abstract, symbolic. Each person takes from it what they want, but that's what's going on there. Moving on to another sculptor, a woman this time, and as you can imagine, in the small world of sculptors, there were even fewer women, very, very few women around. She was born in 1903 and lived to the age of 72. And she was often identified with Henry Moore. Her work is modernist, and she is linked with people like Henry Moore, Naum Gabo, Ben Nicholson, Ivan Hitchens, and so on. And she was born in Wakefield, and she met Henry Moore at the Leeds School of Art. She, however, was made a dame in 1965, so she was honoured by the Queen and the government. Here you can see with a couple of her, you can see her with a couple of her pieces, and now there is a major museum dedicated to her in Wakefield, in the town that she was born in, or that she was brought up in, and it opened in May 2011, and well worth a go if you're in the north of England. So this would be so you can see a link with Henry Moore in the massive sculptures, but Barbara Hepworth's were more abstract. She doesn't represent the human form. This is probably her best known work, which I think is in New York. Yes, it's in the United Nations building in New York City. So obviously, if you come from Yorkshire, England, and the United Nations in New York City ask you to do a sculpture, you're pretty pleased with yourself. That's really a way that you managed to make it. This work is called Crucifixion Homage to Mondrian. So Mondrian being the abstract painter I mentioned to you, and also crucifixions of something more perhaps more esoteric. Here are a very typical piece of hers here. So again, this is playing with forms. It's not supposed to have a particular message, even less so than Henry Moore in a way, because you could say that the way that he presents human beings gives you a feeling about what our attitude to human beings should be, dignity and fragility and so on. And this is not the case with Barbara Hepworth, who is just working with forms, which is one way of doing art, which you can like or not like. Of course, they have to be placed in particular places. So in this case, placed in a garden, and the beauty, because they're supposed to be beautiful, the beauty is meant to mix with the characteristics of the environment. There's another one again there in a little quad, perhaps in Cambridge. She also did smaller works and indoor works. This is just a big, it's only a couple of foot long, and she got working with holes and string. Holes and string was her medium for quite a whole period of her work, and she'd come up with things like this, or indeed like this, yes, which is the joy of form, if you like. Going to move on now. I'm giving you a sort of rapid tour of 20 or so British artists. I'm going to move on now to something completely different. S Lowry, born in 1887 and died in 1976. Extremely popular, and interestingly enough, this is the only modern art which you could find on the walls of my father's house. My father, working class man from Lancashire, who generally modern art would not be so keen on, but Lowry got its place there, which is very, very interesting. Obviously a reproduction, not an original. So what did Lowry do? Well, Lowry was an English artist born in Stretford and worked all his life really in some very unartistic job. I can't remember if it was a rent collector or yes, no, he was an insurance. He worked for he worked collecting rents at the time. Of course you didn't pay with your carte bleue at the time. The rent collector came around every Thursday and knocked on your door and said, "Could I have the rent, please?" Yeah, it was a very, very old-fashioned way of doing things, and that's what he worked as. But in his spare time, he was this artist, and this is the place that he was brought up in. So, classic working class north of England, not back to backs. In fact, they're not back to backs, but terraced housing. And this is the sort of work that he would come up with. Industrial landscapes, if you like. Large numbers of people. You can see their workplaces. You can see the factories with the smoke behind. And in this case, it's the match. They're going to the football match. Many thousands of them going to the football match because the popularity of football in England, even today, is huge. But before, absolutely massive, the Saturday afternoon. And there they are all going. So he's painting his people, working class people, enjoying themselves. But yet, when you look at them, they never really look like they're enjoying themselves. Look, they're all sort of bent forward and just and seem to be advancing rather mechanically. And so it's and it's never sunny. It's never sunny in Lowry's paintings. However, despite the fact that it can sometimes be sunny in Britain, I assure you. And so this is a very distinctive idea of how to present. Now, what does this mean to people? Well, people were delighted to have it. Working class people were delighted to have it because putting ordinary people in a painting is to say they are important. Yeah. If paintings only have kings and pop stars and fundamentally rich people, then that has a message. And so just putting ordinary people's lives, even the simple everyday life, which is not that exciting, not that joyful, was one way of valorizing everyday experience. Here you have them again at the fairground. But again, although it's a fairground, nobody is in emotional abandon and excitement. That doesn't happen in Lowry's work. It took him a long time to become recognized. For a long time, he was considered to be a bit of a Sunday painter, a bit of a naive worker. And although he actually studied at the Manchester Municipal College of Art in the 1910s under the French Impressionists. For the First World War, and I don't know if we've got any more interesting information here. But yes, there is a huge museum in Manchester dedicated to him, the Lowry. Well, it's got 55 paintings and 200 drawings by the artist. So the whole series of them, and you can see it is fairly sad. Look, there's always the smoke in the background and the kind of fog. And here you have people who are obviously veterans of the First World War, wounded soldiers, and not looking very excited about it. And here indeed, this is quite a close-up. You've actually got faces on them, something quite grim, really. One more there. Very everyday, but people did love it, and it later became recognized. Again, lots of smoke, going to work, coming back to work. Not a lot of joy involved. And when he recently, in fact, a memorial statue has been put up to L.S. Lowry in a park in Manchester. And this is interesting because it's obviously a modern statue because he's just sat on a bench. It's like you could just come up and meet him accidentally. He's not being shown as a great artist we must all look up to at all. He's just an ordinary chap. Now, how far is this high culture or popular culture? Well, he trained under a French impressionist. That's pretty high culture. And yet, certainly from a reception point of view, he's this extremely popular painter, extremely popular in the working class. And also he has the rather interesting distinction of being one of the only two painters I know about. No, that's not true. There are several painters who have had pop songs written about them. There's one about Picasso, there's one about Van Gogh. But apart from the absolutely great international ones, he's a very rare case. And indeed, the pop song which was written about him, and he painted Matchstick Men and Matchstick Cats and Dogs, was extremely popular. It got to #1 or 2 in the pop charts, and I will link up to it on the blog. And so if you are a painter who paints stuff which is loved and people write a pop song about you, does that make you part of popular culture? Probably does in some ways, yes, but you can see that these borders are not as easy to make as we might have thought. Something quite different altogether here. If I have a look at Francis Bacon, who died in 1992, who produced, there was an exhibition of his work in Paris a couple of years ago, who produced a very tortured work where he certainly has something to say, but he certainly is not wanting to make you to think, oh, isn't that beautiful? Oh, doesn't that make me feel that there is beauty in the world? Yeah. On the contrary, he's looking at suffering in the world, and so here, yeah, for example, he specializes in distorted and destroyed human bodies. Now, this is no doubt partly related to the fact that he was a homosexual artist at a time when it was dangerous to be homosexual in Britain. Certainly in the 50s, it was dangerous to be homosexual. Suicide rates were very high. And so, you know, some of the, I mean, in general, you know, obviously many artists think that the human condition in general is tragic and twisted and dangerous, but this probably gave him extra reason to look at that side of things. Here's another one. You can see there you've got a horrific human face with a mouth in the middle, but the whole face has collapsed in on itself. And here, you are, the artist is hoping that you will want to look at this and see and get something from this horrifically violent view of what human experience could be like. But I think it's fair enough to say that you probably don't want it in your kitchen. Oh, sorry. It's a very well-known thing where you have what appears to be an archbishop or a cardinal sat on a chair and being burnt or disintegrating in some way and screaming at the same time. So again, you've got the reference to religion, which is supposed to make your world coherent and calm you, but obviously it's not working there. He based this on a famous Spanish painting. This is by Velázquez, which was about some hundreds of years ago, of course. He decided at one point to start working on triptychs. So these are collections of 3 paintings, and the triptych is a classic religious form of art, typically in a church at the altar, and very often the triptych will close and there'll be another painting on the back, and you open it only on feast days and so on. A very long tradition, a very long and rich tradition of triptychs. And so he takes this form, which traditionally has been a religious form about explaining the world and making the world okay, but he uses it to show destruction and tearing apart of human beings. There's another one of his. There's another triptych there, so you can see that these figures, then they appear to be on the seaside with a parasol, and yet they're not at all the relaxing seaside holiday. On the contrary, they seem to be extremely violent. He only really began working quite late in his life. He only painted a little bit in his 20s and 30s. He earned his living as an interior decorator and designer of furniture. And he gradually worked up to then this, oh, I've lost my page there. He then gradually worked up to his later violent work. He painted variations on the crucifixion, half human, half grotesque heads. His lover, George Dyer, committed suicide in 1971, and certainly this didn't help him make his paintings any more cheerful. On the other hand, if you see interviews with him, he always appeared to be a bon vivant. He liked to eat and drink and gamble with other artists like Lucian Freud and Patrick Swift. And since his death, his reputation has steadily grown, although Margaret Thatcher famously described him as that man who paints those dreadful pictures. He was the subject of 3 major exhibitions in the Tate so far, which is almost unheard of. So what else do I have to say about that? Probably not a lot more. I might have one more of them. Yes, this is perhaps the most impressive of the triptychs, and you can see that we do have human people here. But what has happened to them? What have they been through to end up tortured in this manner? This is powerful and reminds us that that artists can choose. Artists is always about grabbing your emotion or your intellect and moving them and shaking them around, but it doesn't have to be to make you feel about something about beauty. It can be to make you feel something about horror and torture and tearing. So let's move on to Lucian Freud, British painter, best known for his thickly impasted portrait and figure paintings, and actually the grandson of Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis. And he moved with his family to England in 1933 because he was in Germany or Austria, Germany, I think. And obviously in 1933 for a Jew, the best place to be was like anywhere else. So he came to Britain in 1933 with his family. So when he was 11, and went to Dottington Hall School, and away he went. Now his early paintings were often associated with surrealism, but then he specialized more in portraits. Now you can see that this is something much more, it's not really traditional, but it's much obviously more traditional than Francis Bacon. And so he specialized in these rather emotional portraits. He apparently spent 4,000 hours on a series of paintings of his own mother. So well, you sit still for 4,000 hours, Mum. Yeah. He very much liked to paint people with their animals. A couple of paintings of people with animals there. There was a major Lucian Freud exhibition in Paris 4 or 5 years ago, which is not great for you, because if you didn't see it, which you probably didn't, then it won't come back for a long time. So people with their dogs. Some of them were sold for huge amounts of money. I think this was one of them, huge amounts of money. And indeed, the whole question of money and the contemporary art world is quite complex and also very controversial, because of course, when people see works being sold for millions of pounds, they say, well, what's going on here? Perhaps his most famous piece is this one, which is from 2000 to 2001. He painted this, which is called a painting of the Queen, and is a very surprising painting, because the tradition of painting queens is lying about them, showing them to be younger, more royal, more perfect in every way, and from an artistic point of view, today is pretty boring. And contemporary artists generally do not paint queens and kings anymore. Old artists, last century, the century before did, but contemporary artists really don't. It's considered to be a bit passé. And so this is then something different, not only the Queen, but the Queen in her crown. And as you can see, he hasn't tried to make her look perfect, or younger than she really is, or etc. So what is he doing here? Well, there's no single answer. Each one is to interpret them, but certainly she looks very human. She looks very determined. Does she look bitter? Yeah, she might, is the way you look at it. And this caused a bit of a scandal in the conservative press. The tabloid newspaper, The Sun, said it's a travesty. It makes her look like one of the royal corgis who has suffered a stroke, said, in fact, that was somebody from the British Art Journal. Whereas the Guardian art critic said it was probably the best royal portrait anywhere in the world for at least 150 years. So there you go, you take your choice. Now, of course, you get the question of, did the Queen like it? Well, of course, we don't know, because the Queen would never tell us something like that. However, she sat for him, and she's not stupid. She knew what kind of portraits he produced, and she sat for him to paint a portrait of her. So I would not be surprised if, in fact, she was quite pleased with it. Oh, yes, here we have some figures. The one that I mentioned to you before, the benefit benefit supervisor sleeping, was sold for $33 million in 2008. When, if I can remember correctly, he was still alive. Yeah, and that was a world record for sale value of a painting by a living artist. Am I going to do one more? No, that's half an hour. I'm going to stop. No, I'm going to do one more. Tracy Emin, then, born in 1963. So still alive, of course. This is she's an English artist, and she is part of a group known as the Brit Artists, or the YBAs, the Young British Artists. And her speciality is, first of all, to show herself. She comes from a working class background, and first of all is to show herself as culturally working class, although she's a supporter of Margaret Thatcher and very much part of the elite these days. Nevertheless, she doesn't speak politely and bourgeois like the other artists do. So that's one interesting thing. And the other thing that she does is that she very much puts on stage her personal life. And finally, she plays around with the different materials she works with. So that's one of her early things. This is one of her most famous ones. It's a tent. And inside there are a whole load of names, embroidered or quilted. And it's simply called Everyone I Have Ever Slept With. And the title has been 63 to 95. And the title is to be taken literally, because it includes young friends when she was 6 or 8 years old who came over to sleep at her house. And it also includes boyfriends and so on. So that's the inside of it. I don't know how her ex-boyfriends felt about this, but you can see that it's something very unusual, a tent with names on it. The essence is not virtuoso. It's not difficult to do once you've had the idea. So it's conceptual art to a certain extent. And also in general, well, embroidery is something very personal. Here's another example. This is quilted or embroidered. I do not expect to be a mother, but I do expect to die alone. And so what's going on here is there's a huge contrast between the material, which is embroidery, the sort of thing that grandmas do, and you expect it to say, home sweet home, or there is nothing so important as friendship, or something very, very twee and traditional and sentimental. So she's used this traditionalist form, but it says, I do not expect to be a mother, but I do expect to die alone, which my brain's all split up. And so this contrast gives an effect to the person looking at it, which you may like if you wish. She was shortlisted for the Turner Prize, and I think she came second with this piece, which is called My Bed. So it's a bed, and the sheets are dirty, and there are various items strewn around, dirty underwear and not preservatives, condoms and so on and so forth. So that's this, as you can imagine, caused a certain amount of scandal. It got number 2 prize or something, and the conservative newspapers were very angry. Otherwise, to go on to the question of form, here she's working with neon lights, and it says, only God knows I'm good. And so here again, the most important thing is the contrast. Neon lights, you normally expect to say, drink Pepsi Cola or some superficial commercial slogan. And so here she's using a form which makes you expect one thing, but then the message, only God knows I'm good, is meditative and religious, which is in some ways the opposite of the neon lights. We have another one here. You should have loved me. Now, it's very difficult to tell people whether that they should like it or not like it. I think this is fabulous stuff, but it's not for everybody. And the last piece that I wanted to mention from Tracy Emin, then, is this piece. You can see the full piece on the right. That is a huge plinth with a little family of lost animals, meerkats perhaps. And you can see on the left a close-up to see them. So this is a little play on the artistic form of the plinth. And normally you have the plinth and then the solid sculpture above it. Here you have the little fragile family of sculptures saying, oh, am I supposed to be here? Now, this is a long tradition within artistic endeavor of all sorts, is to do sculptures about sculpture and paintings about painting and make films about filmmaking. This is and sing songs about singers as well. So this is what the self-referential, and of course write novels about what it means to write a novel. The self-referential side of modern art is tremendously important, and here you get a little example of it. So I'm going to stop there for today. I have some more artists for you in the next chapter. So what do I need to do? I need to first of all stop it here and then end the meeting here.